Book 20.6 The Glitterbug by Colin Harris.
The Glitterbug Contents. Chapter 1, Enough is Enough. Chapter 2, Waiting in the Dark. Chapter 3, Setting the Trap. Chapter 4, Caught. Chapter 5, No Escape. Chapter 6, Bath Time. Chapter 7, Sweet Dreams. Chapter 8, The Monster Undresses. Chapter 1, Enough is Enough. After the litterbug had attacked them, the gleeks limped and hobbled back to their den. They had so many cuts and grazes to patch up that they nearly ran out of sticking plaster. Luckily, gleeks heal very quickly. Then they crept into their beds for a miserable night's sleep. But the next day, the gleeks were angry. Gleeks live for a very long time, and they only get angry about once every 100 years. But when they do get angry, someone had better watch out. Yesterday, the litterbug had made fools out of them, but today they intended to put a stop to his tricks once and for all.
The gleeks held a meeting to work out their battle plan. They did not need to discuss things for long. They all knew what they had to do. They had to catch the litterbug and stop him from getting up to any more mischief. That was easier said than done. How could they catch someone who was invisible? It was a puzzle. They sat thinking until late into the night, and they couldn't find the answer. In the end, they were so tired that they just fell asleep where they were. But for once, the gleeks had forgotten all about the other animals in the garden. These animals had been looking for the litterbug too, and one of them was on his way to see them right now. Suddenly, bits of dirt and rock began to drop down from the roof of their den, and then a furry head poked through.
"How do?"
said the head.
"Just thought I'd drop in to see you. Drop in? Get the joke?"
It was a mole,
"I wish you wouldn't hide your front door so well,"
complained the mole.
"And my fur got wet coming across that dratted pond. What do you want to live here for?"
The gleeks chuckled, but they didn't have time to sit around gossiping to a mole.
"It's good of you to visit us, but it would be better if you came back later,"
said one of the gleeks.
"We must get a good night's sleep if we are going to be fresh enough in the morning to work out a plan to get rid of the litterbug."
"That's why I came,"
said the mole.
"I think I may be able to help you. There's someone I think you should meet, and now is just about the right time to meet him. I think he'll just be getting up."
The gleeks were puzzled. What could the mole possibly mean? It was past midnight. Who would be just getting up now?
"Come on,"
insisted the mole.
"Shake a leg. Get a move on."
Chapter 2, Waiting in the Dark. The gleeks rubbed the sleep out of their eyes and stumbled after the mole, who led them out into the dark night. The mole stopped under one of the trees in the middle of the lawn.
"We'll wait here,"
said the mole.
"My friend will arrive in a minute."
So the mole and the gleeks waited in the moonlight for the unknown visitor. The gleeks were baffled. Who was coming to see them? Then an owl hooted, and the gleeks smiled at each other. Owls wake up at night. They were sure that a wise owl was going to visit them. But the hooting faded as the owl moved further away, and the gleeks knew that they would have to wait a bit longer. Some of them began to doze off again, but not for long. Suddenly there was a flapping sound, and the gleeks had to duck and dive out of the way as a big black shape came swooping down on them. The gleeks thought the bat was attacking them. They were about to run away when the mole shouted,
"Don't be afraid. This is my friend. He won't harm you. There's no need to bat an eyelid. Get it? Bat an eyelid."
The gleeks were not in the mood For jokes, the bat had given them a nasty shock. The bat landed on a low branch. It was odd chatting with someone who was upside down,
Right,
said the mole.
tell your story.
I used to live in a little cave.
Squeaked the bat.
I'd lived there with my family for a year. But one day, something came along and attacked us. It moved too fast to see. It drove us out of the cave, and we had to find another place to live. Now the cave is full of smelly rubbish, and there's a door to stop anyone from getting in. But sometimes the door is open, and I can hear something moving about in there.
The Gleeks looked at each other. They were sure that the bat's story was important. The mole agreed,
I reckon the Glitterbug keeps all his stuff in there.
said the mole.
So we should be able to catch him if we're clever. That should bug him. Get it? Bug him!
The Gleeks did not think that the mole's jokes were very funny, but their eyes sparkled. They asked the bat if he would take them to the cave, but the bat shook his head.
I must go hunting so that I can feed my family,
He squeaked.
but the mole knows where it is, and he'll take you there.
Sure thing,
Said the mole.
let's go.
They travelled for about 10 minutes, and when they reached the cave, the mole said,
I'd better be off now. Good luck. I hope you catch your bug, but make sure it's not a dummy bug. Get it?
and chuckling away to himself, he vanished into the ground. The Gleeks inspected the cave and all the trees around it, but the Glitterbug was nowhere to be seen. He'd gone off for a day or two to collect the last things he needed for his big attack. Very quietly they opened the door and crept into the cave. They stayed in there for a long, long time. They inspected everything, and it did not take them long to find a little trail of footprints in the dust on the ground. That was the last little bit of proof they needed. The Gleeks could tell from all the things in the cave that the Glitterbug had not finished with the animal park just yet. They were sure that he was going to use the rubbish to make an even bigger mess. Well, it was their job to stop him, and that's just what they intended to do. Leaving everything just as it was, they closed the door and went home. Now they could make some proper plans. They must trap the Glitterbug inside the cave and keep him there before he could mess up the park again. But what should they do with him then? They had to do some hard thinking. For the rest of that day, the Gleeks worked frantically to get everything ready before the Glitterbug had time to strike again. They turned their den into a workshop, and there was lots going on. It was impossible to tell exactly what they were doing. Some of them were sticking stuff to a big sheet of cloth, and some of them were making things out of wood. Yet others were collecting together hammers and nails, mops and brushes, tins of white paint and tubes of superstick. And in one corner, 3 Gleeks just seemed to be playing the fool by climbing on top of each other. What were they all up to? Chapter 3, Setting the Trap. At the end of the day, everything was ready. The Gleeks waited until midnight, then they collected together all the things they had made, crept out of their tunnel, and set off for the cave. They moved through the trees without a sound, and even though the Gleeks were tired out, as soon as they arrived, they set to work again. First of all, they took all the Glitterbug's rubbish out of the cave and hid it in the trees. As soon as the cave was empty, there was a sound of sweeping, scrubbing, and rubbing. Every time the cave door opened, clouds of dust came out. Then the tins of paint were opened, and there was a wet, slopping sound as the Gleeks slapped the paint onto the rocky walls. Even before the paint had time to dry, The Gleeks began to carry some of the things they had made into the cave and set them out. Now there was the sound of hammering and the smell from the tubes of superstick. Several hours passed, then they all came out of the cave. There was one last job to do. The Gleeks dragged a small chest close to the door of the cave and hid it under twigs and leaves. Now they had finished. Everyone was grinning. They all found places to hide, and this time they made sure that the Glitterbug could not possibly see them.
Chapter 4 Caught. The Glitterbug was on his way back. He was pleased with himself. He had collected more things which would help him to make a mess of the park. He had everything he needed, and today was the day when he intended to carry out his big attack. He couldn't wait to get started. But first, he had to pay a visit to his cave to get the rest of the things he needed. Very slowly, he looked all around. Good, there was nobody to be seen. He had given those Gleeks a good beating the other day. No wonder they had vanished. They would probably hide away for at least a week, and if today went as he planned, they would hide away for years. The Glitterbug felt happy. He just knew that everything was going to go well. Humming a little tune to himself, he headed for the cave. He could go slowly today. There was nobody there to see him.
Even as he got closer to the cave, he did not see the hidden Gleeks. He was thinking about all the things he was going to do today, like dropping tins of paint all over the park, spraying all the trees bright yellow, smashing the glass in the dome, and tipping drums of filthy liquid into the pool. He was still daydreaming when he reached the cave. The Gleeks stayed absolutely still. They watched and waited. Would the Glitterbug go into the cave? The Glitterbug stopped at the door, his hand on the wooden bar. Very slowly he looked all around. The Gleeks froze. They were sure he would spot them. 1 minute passed, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes. Then, at long last, the Glitterbug pulled away the bar and strode into the cave. The Gleeks rushed for the cave. In less than 10 seconds, the cave was surrounded. The door slammed shut. They pushed down the thick wooden bar, and to make quite sure, they used a padlock and chain too. Inside the cave, the Glitterbug was going frantic. The Gleeks had painted and polished everything. The entire cave was clean and sparkling, and everything smelt fresh. The Glitterbug hated it, and he tried to smash everything up. But the Gleeks had expected this, and everything was rock solid. They had stuck and nailed everything down, so the Glitterbug could not tip anything over. The lamp was stuck to the chest of drawers, and the drawers were nailed shut. The books were stuck to the shelf. The picture was stuck to the wall. Even the blankets were stuck to the bed, and everything was stuck to the ground. The Glitterbug tried his best, but he just could not mess up the cave. Chapter 5 No Escape. The Glitterbug turned to the door. He hammered his fists against it. He kicked it. He ran from one end of the cave and smashed his body against it, but the door stood firm. Now he began to shout and rant.
I'll get you for this,
he screamed.
I know you're out there. Don't think you'll get away with this. When I get out of here, I'll have your guts for garters. Then I'll smash up your park and everything in it. Let me out! Let me out! Let me out!
But at the other side of the door, the Gleeks stayed quiet. They hadn't finished with the Glitterbug yet. The Glitterbug went on shouting and screaming for several hours. Every so often he tried to beat down the door again, but he only hurt himself, so he had to give up. He sat down in the middle of the cave and shivered. Everything was so clean and fresh, that it was making him feel jumpy. He just had to find a way out. The Glitterbug couldn't stand it for much longer, but he knew that there was no way to escape. He crouched in the middle of the cave, shivering and crying to himself.
It's clean in here.
He whispered.
It looks clean and it smells clean. Everything is fresh and white. It hurts my eyes. It's clean and horrible.
He dashed across to the door again.
Let me out. Please let me out.
He wailed.
I'll be good, I will.
But the Gleeks would not let him out. They did not trust him. They watched and waited. Chapter 6, Bath Time. The Glitterbug sat on the cold ground all through the night. He kept begging the Gleeks to let him out, but he got no answer. By the time morning came, the Glitterbug was tired out. He collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep, deep sleep. This is just what the Gleeks had been waiting for. Very quickly they opened the door, and 2 Gleeks ran in with a big tin bath. Running after them were more Gleeks, carrying jugs full of hot water. Just behind them were even more Gleeks, carrying a colossal bar of soap, a tin of talcum powder, and a big fluffy towel. Before the Glitterbug knew what was happening, the Gleeks had dropped him in the bath, scrubbed him clean, rubbed him dry, and put him back on the bed. The cave door slammed shut once again. The Glitterbug was feeling awful. He was locked in a prison that was spick and span and sparkling bright, and he was cleaner than he had ever been in his long and wicked life. Where was it all going to end? The Gleeks had put him in a proper fix. Who had ever heard of a clean Glitterbug? He wished that he'd never come back to the animal park. He should have retired when he'd finished in Pullum Town. That's what he should have done. But the Glitterbug was not ready to give up just yet. Perhaps he could trick the Gleeks into letting him go. He crept across to the door and tapped on it quietly.
Please let me out.
He whispered.
I've had plenty of time to do a lot of thinking in here. I'm very sorry for all the mess I've made. I'll be good from now on. I'll go away and I'll never come back.
But if the Glitterbug thought that his plan would work, he was in for a shock. The Gleeks were not ready to trust him just yet. One of the Gleeks shouted back through the door.
We are not going to let you go until we are sure that you will never make a mess again. We know you. You'll just go away and make a mess somewhere else. You're not getting out of there until we can trust you completely.
The Glitterbug forgot all about the fact that he was trying to trick the Gleeks.
You must be bonkers,
he shouted.
I'm a Glitterbug, not a namby-pamby, goody-goody little Gleek. I was made for mischief and mess. Go jump in a river. I'll get out of here somehow. Then you're all for it. Please yourself,
shouted the Gleeks.
You'd better go back to bed for a bit. Perhaps you'll feel differently in the morning. Sweet dreams.
Chapter 7, Sweet Dreams.
The Gleeks knew that it was nearly time for the very last part of their plan. They waited quietly outside the door. One of the Gleeks squinted through a little crack in the wood, waiting for the Glitterbug to go to sleep again. After a while he turned to the others.
He's asleep,
he whispered.
Come on, it's sweet dreams time.
Very quickly they pulled out the chest that was hidden under the branches, opened it up and pulled out the contents. Back inside the cave, the Glitterbug was stretched out on the bed, snoring loudly and in the middle of a lovely sweet dream. He had just escaped from his prison, and he had caught all the Gleeks. He had them trapped in a corner of the dome, and he was pelting them with rubbish. But then his dream went all topsy-turvy. Suddenly he was back in the cave and the door was creaking open.
He could hear an awful wailing sound, and something terrible shuffled slowly into his prison. Then he heard these chilling words.
Glitterbug, Glitterbug, are you there? I'm coming to get you.
The awful shape shuffled into the cave and looked down on the Glitterbug.
I am the litter monster.
It wailed.
I must wander from land to land, hunting for litter louts and teach them better ways.
The Glitterbug's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He looked around frantically for a way to escape, but the litter monster was blocking the doorway.
I am looking for the most terrible litter lout of them all,
moaned the monster.
He is called the Glitterbug. Do you know where I can find him?
The Glitterbug turned as white as a sheet. He was frightened out of his wits. His hands trembled and his teeth chattered. He was trapped, and he knew it. Then the Glitterbug did a very brave thing.
I am the Glitterbug,
he admitted.
but I am very sorry for everything I have done, and I will make up for it in any way I can.
He gulped and shut his eyes. What would happen to him now? The litter monster shuffled over to the bed. It towered above him and stretched out its arms.
Do you mean what you say?
It wailed.
Yes, yes,
stammered the Glitterbug.
I was thinking of giving up anyway. I will put everything right. I will.
The litter monster leaned over and prodded him with a long finger that looked as if it was made from an old bone.
Well, perhaps I will let you go this one last time.
It moaned.
But you had better watch out. If I have to come back, you will be very, very sorry.
The Glitterbug nodded his head so fast that it looked as if it would fall off. Very slowly the horrible creature shuffled out of the cave and the door swished shut. What a terrible dream! Quickly the Glitterbug nipped his arm to wake himself up, but nothing happened. He hadn't been asleep at all. The litter monster was not a dream, and if he didn't do as it asked, it would come back for him. The Glitterbug fainted. Chapter 8. The Monster Undresses. Back outside the cave, the Gleeks could hardly keep quiet. They were chuckling and giggling as they undressed the litter monster. They had made it from an old sheet and a lot of useless rubbish, and 3 of them had been inside it all the time. This had been the last part of their plan, and it worked even better than they had hoped. The Glitterbug had just been given the shock of his life. Very quickly, the Gleeks hid everything away so that the Glitterbug would never know that they had tricked him. They had just finished putting everything away when the Glitterbug staggered out of the cave, looking pale and frightened.
Are you ready to put everything right now?
They asked him. The Glitterbug nodded his head. He would do anything to stop the litter monster from visiting him again. So for the next week, the Gleeks made the Glitterbug work in the park, putting right all the things he had messed up. He worked very hard, and as he could still move very fast, it was incredible how quickly things got done. At the end of each day, the Gleeks made sure that he had a bath and put on clean things. As the days went by, an odd thing happened. The Glitterbug looked forward to cleaning things up and putting things in order. He felt much better now that he had clean hands and his things didn't smell any more. And he had made some friends. The Gleeks were good to him, and at the end of the day, after he had had his bath, they let him play with them. Slowly but surely, the Glitterbug forgot all his nasty old habits, and he worked hard to help the Gleeks keep the gardens neat. At last, the day came when the Gleeks could trust him fully, and they called a big meeting around the pool. Tom and Kate came, and their dad came too. Kate had explained to the Gleeks that it was their dad who left them sacks full of food every night, so Adam Hardwick became the very first adult the Gleeks trusted. The Gleeks gathered round the Litterbug and presented him with a fresh outfit.
This is for you,
They said,
and it is very well deserved.
The Litterbug rushed off to put it on, and when he came back, everyone clapped in amazement.
Hooray!
Shouted the Gleeks.
The Litterbug has gone forever. It's time to meet a completely different animal called the Glitterbug. The Glitterbug!
and from that day on, that's what everybody called him. The end.